Thank you very much for the gracious introduction. Good evening, namaste. Like all of you, I am also here to listen to my good friend Dr. Kondapalli. He is, in fact, no, I mean that. I mean every word of what I say. He knows China backwards. He knows the region. He's a genuine scholar. I'm merely a diplomat. And I have served in China. I've been following China. What I will share is a perspective as an Indian diplomat, as I see it. And certainly, I do not represent or I am no longer in the saddle. So, what I am going to share are my views. But Aman Pandey, Torunika, first of all, compliments to you and your friends to launch this very impressive website and to dive deep into international relations. It is a lovely venture. I wish you all success. And in today's world, it's very important that scholars like you all uh, have a very good feel for international relations because for us, we are in a very difficult security environment and we have two very friendly neighbors, one to our north called China and another to our west called Pakistan, who are going to keep us busy for quite some time. Tibet, conundrum, China, India. It was 1992 or no, 1994 when I was Director North in the Ministry of External Affairs, and North in the Ministry of External Affairs is responsible for Bhutan and Nepal, which is quite a handful. When I was asked to or told that I'm being entrusted with the Tibetan affairs also. And before I could say anything, because I did have my plate full, I was told that I'll have the singular privilege of getting an audience with His Holiness from time to time. I mean, I could not have asked for anything better. I said yes, yes, and yes. And there were magical moments. Uh, I was looking after Tibetan affairs for about a year, and there were magical moments which I cannot share details. I'll not get into details, but with Holiness, talking about various things, listening to his perspective, and I still remember first time when I called on him. He has this delightful habit of holding the hand, and for some 30 minutes that I was with him, he was holding the hand. I didn't wash my hand for 6 days thereafter. I won't let anybody touch my hand because I was blessed by His Holiness. And the feeling in his presence is something that is very difficult to describe. So that is what I am. I have the greatest respect for the Tibetan cause, affection for the Tibetan cause, respect for His Holiness. So I am an admirer. So that is my background. Now let us jump straight into the issue at hand. Notwithstanding stated positions, as I see it, what do the Tibetans want? Simple, they want to live in peace, they want functional autonomy, they want a freedom to follow their religion, traditions, and customs. If there is no choice, they are willing even to accept, I think, and I said, I am cutting through the chase, I'm not going into stated positions, and I can speak freely because I can. They will even settle to be a part of China, but all that they want is no interference, so that they can pursue their religious and cultural affairs. And they have paid a heavy price. Only God knows what a heavy price they have paid for the peaceful struggle. They have faced the brutality of Chinese. And now, what is the status of Tibet? The world has two views on Tibet's status. One is that Tibet has generally been a part of China, historically been a part of China. The other view is that Tibet has generally been a free nation, uh, and the international community is divided, particularly Europe and the US, according to my reading, feel that Tibet is historically a part of China. The fact remains that uh, since the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1911, for all practical purposes, Tibet was an autonomous region. And in 1949, they even expelled the Chinese liaison mission, which was there in Tibet. Now, my batchmate, who was the foreign secretary, Vijay Gokhale, and who knows a thing or two about China, in his recent book, he writes that Chairman Mao, uh, within a few days of coming to power, told the Russian or the Soviet ambassador about their plans to take over Tibet, and but they had logistical issues. They also knew that Americans were openly hostile. They also suspected India. In fact, Mao did not have a high opinion of Pandit Nehru. He deemed India to be a capitalist country which would facilitate the American or give assistance to the US. In fact, in a letter to the then Secretary General of the Communist Party, Mao called Prime Minister Nehru an imperialist collaborator. But anyways, that's for another day. Mao visits Moscow, gets an assurance, and the rest is history. When the Chinese moved into Tibet, India consulted the international community, particularly British, because they were the nation with supposedly with the most diplomatic experience, and were advised that I'm not letting you into any secret. What I know is from published sources. Britain suggested that short of boots on the ground, any effort that can be, any assistance that can be rendered should be rendered. The fact is that when China was weak, when the logistical support was not there, when the communication links were fragile, the international community did not act. There is a lot of talk of support, but again, if I were to speak with candor, there's a huge gap between the support that is spoken of and actually what is done. For the Western world, it is all about relationship with China, and whenever there is some strain in the relationship, the Tibetan issue is resurrected, and then it is forgotten. His Holiness came to India in 1959, and ever since has been an honored guest. We have extended all possible assistance, support to His Holiness. I've treated him with the greatest respect, and he has been very, very sensitive to India's concerns, to India's sensitivities. India has paid actually a big price for the fact that we have welcomed His Holiness, that we are home to about 250,000 Tibetans. And one of the reasons for the 1962 war was the fact that His Holiness is on the Indian soil. The strain in the relationship Tibet is one of the reasons. And the Tibetans have tried their best since 1950 to try and impact the control of China. What has happened is precisely the opposite. Precisely the opposite, because China is one country which does not understand peaceful resistance. Self-immolations, about 100 Tibetans in 2008-9 committed the ultimate price of their life. But a country like China it meant nothing. Fact is, the Chinese are in complete control. They have built world-class infrastructure. They have Sinicized Tibet. They are flooding Tibet with the Han Chinese tourists, and the eyes and ears are everywhere. So that is a fact of life. Yet it's also a fact of life that it is literally an occupying force. The president of China that Aditya alluded to went visited China after a period of 30 years, and some of the experts point out how there was concern writ large over the faces of the security, how the visit was kept completely under wraps, how in the crowd, not a crowd, but people who were present in Lhasa, there were more Hans than Tibetans. So the fact of occupation is very clear. Now, what can India do? My feeling is that we are doing what is possible. Uh, The only thing that can be done further is, if necessary, to provide citizenship to the Tibetans, but according to the wishes of the Tibetan leadership, so that they don't get assimilated in this huge country called India. Their separate identity has been kept alive. Diplomacy also warrants is a factor where you decide when not to exercise a choice, when not to jump in into something where the chances of succeeding are not very high. I know it is not music to the ears of many people, but I, for one, if asked whether we should get in, scale up or do something more or get into any interventionist posture with Tibet, I would strongly recommend against it. So let me pause here and hand over the floor to Dr. Kondapalli. Ask all the difficult questions to him, please. The softer questions are for me, and I'll bless anybody who asks me a soft question. Thank you very much.